Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 8. Chapter 62-69. While I wanted to visit my grandma and dad, I had spent the rest of the afternoon with Brianna and Mason. I returned to the pack house around 7, immediately heading to the kitchen for something to eat. Werewolf appetites were troublesome at times, requiring a large amount of food to keep us sustained. Alpha Zeke stood in the kitchen, a bowl of chicken and rice in his hands. His black hair was a tousled mess on his head, his large body leaning against the countertop. His eyes twinkled in amusement as I walked into the kitchen. "Here, I made dinner." Alpha Zeke grinned, looking much too young for his age. He shoved a bowl of steaming food towards me, his eyes expectant. With little more than a grin, I grabbed the bowl and dug in. Alpha Zeke had something about him that invited you in. While he still had that powerful aura of an alpha, he was carefree and had a great sense of humor. "Where's Alpha Madox?" I kept my voice even with just a hint of curiosity. I forced the longing from my voice. As strange as it felt, I missed him. I hadn't seen him since training, and had noticed the absence of his presence. "You call your mate by his title?" Alpha Zeke snorted, his mouth full of food. "I'm not sure what he's doing. Said he'll be back shortly though." "Did he tell you we were mates?" I pursed my lips, trying to hide the hopeful tone in my voice. Alpha Madox was well over 18. He would know if the two of us were mates. "He hasn't said anything to me, but it's pretty obvious." Alpha Zeke shrugged, his lips pulling up in a smirk. "The way you look at him says it all." I wanted to roll my eyes and let a frustrated huff leave my lips. Alpha Madox hadn't said anything about being my mate. Alpha Zeke had gotten his information from the way I looked at Alpha Madox. The information provided little help, and only frustrated me more. "I have no idea who my mate is," I pointed out. "I wouldn't be surprised if it's Alpha Madox." Alpha Zeke shrugged unbothered but let a smirk form on his face. "He rarely shows interest in women, but I can see what intrigued him about you." "He rarely shows interest." I couldn't hide the smug satisfaction that lingered in my words. The thought of Alpha Madox ignoring other females was oddly satisfying. If Alpha Madox expected me to belong to only him, I wanted the same in return. Other men hadn't piqued my interest as well. Other than that vampire. Maya murmured grumpily. She was right after all. Tristan had grabbed my interest. His ethereal beauty nearly matched Alpha Madox's. With his hair light as the sun, he had my attention the moment we met. The mark on my shoulder tingled at the thought, a feeling I shoved deep down within me. Most she-wolves are docile and obedient creatures when it comes to being an alpha. Alpha Zeke nearly grimaced, making me wonder if he experienced the same. "They'd obey our every command without argument." It's not very appealing if you ask me, although Alpha Bran would disagree. He prefers his women to be obedient little creatures. I couldn't help but snort at his comment. "Obedience is difficult for me. I tend to speak without thinking." "Oh, believe me, I noticed." Alpha Zeke winked, flashing me a dazzling smile. Alpha Madox had been quick to find me in the kitchen, as if he knew I had been there all along. His honey eyes met my own, but conveyed no emotion. They were hard, as though he had a rough afternoon. The two of us were quick to head upstairs. Alpha Zeke had thrown out a snarky comment, telling the two of us to have fun. After a half-hearted snarl from Alpha Madox, we headed to his bedroom. I had long ago stopped questioning if Alpha Madox wanted me in his bed. Sleeping by his side felt right, increasing my hope that he would be my mate. While I wanted to ask, I couldn't bring myself to form the words. What if he wasn't my mate? Would I be able to stomach it? I knew my eyes would fill with disappointment if he said no, followed by crisp tears stinging the backs of my eyelids. My birthday was a week away. I could wait a week. You look more troubled than usual. Alpha Madox noted, his dark eyebrow raised in a way that sent butterflies swarming my stomach. I could say the same about you. I noted, ignoring the blood that flooded my face under his intense gaze. Care to share? You go first. Alpha Madox smirked, his eyes dark and patient. He strode over to one of the armchairs in his suite, pouring himself a glass of that dark-colored liquid. Much to my surprise, he poured a second and placed it in my hands. Drink, was all he said. I brought the glass to my lips, determined not to cringe as the strong taste of liquor hit my lips. The alcohol was strong, but contained notes of teak wood, maple, and cinnamon. My chest warmed as I swallowed the liquor, chasing away the chill that had settled over me. Guilt was eating away at me as I debated on whether to tell him about my visit with my father and how I discovered I was part of the Kuritis bloodline. Maya wanted me to tell him, urged me to trust him above all others. In the end, I gave in to her whims. If I couldn't trust my friends and the man I shared a bed with, I could trust no one. Alpha Madox's eyes darkened with every word, with every detail I provided. Any traces of humor fled his chiseled face as I told him about my father. And you're sure of this, Lola? Alpha Madox finally spoke, after a prolonged moment of silence. I'm sure. Unfortunately, I was. I could feel the truth of what I said in my bones. He could use the shadows against us. Alpha Madox paused, his eyes burning with fury. How can my men fight against shadows? The bigger the request, the steeper the price. I repeated for the second time today. I doubt even the Vampire King would pay any price. I wouldn't underestimate him, Lola. Alpha Madox grimaced, underestimating can get you KD. Noted. I nodded, taking his words to heart. I do have something else to tell you. Alpha Madox's dark eyebrow lifted, registering the reluctance in my tone. Stress and frustration clouded his dark eyes, but I had his full attention. Trying not to squirm under his gaze, I told him about my conversation with Luna Freya. She should have come to me directly. Alpha Madox's eyes flared with anger, his lips pressed into a thin line. I could feel his fury rolling in waves. While Luna Freya's actions may have come off as disrespectful, her heart was in the right place. She just wants the best chance for her daughter. I frowned. She knew you would be angry. Angry? Alpha Madox scoffed, his dark eyes burning holes in my skin. Her daughter is a traitor to her own kind, but it is not my pack she betrayed. Her own pack would be responsible for sentencing her. I know. I exhaled, my eyes wide and pleading as I looked on at Alpha Madox's clenched jaw. She wants to get Brittany away from the vampires. She wants to bring her here. Here. Another wave of anger flashed through Alpha Madox's eyes. While his eyes conveyed how he truly felt, his calm voice gave nothing away. If she is to reside in my pack, I will take responsibility of her interrogation and sentencing. My irritation with this irresistible, hot-headed alpha began to grow. My own voice turned sharp, my tone slightly demanding. If she provides crucial information about the vampire's plan, is that enough to prove her innocence? I questioned, my own eyes flashing brightly. I had my own doubts about Brittany, but wanted to give her the best chance I could. If she was truly innocent, then she deserved that chance. Any information about what the vampires were planning could change everything. With the upper hand, we could prevent further intrusions on Alpha Madox's territory. Provided her information is accurate and useful, I will consider it. Alpha Madox murmured thoughtfully, some of the anger draining from his eyes. But I will not provide any of my men in the attempt to rescue Luna Freya's daughter. I will ensure her safety, nothing more. I can work with that. I nodded. I'll tell Luna Freya tomorrow. Alpha Madox stood from the armchair, approaching me with hooded eyes. His glass of liquor was forgotten in his hand. My own frustration faded as his hand lifted to touch my face. His thumb rubbed against my lower lip, sending a cacophony of butterflies swarming in my stomach. Someday I would have to ask him what his obsession with my lips were, but now wasn't the time. Ferocious little Lola. Alpha Madox chuckled darkly, his eyes looming down on my lips. You're not distracting me this time. I murmured breathlessly, my tongue emerging from my lips to flick against his thumb. It's your turn to share. Alpha Madox looked up from my lips, his eyes hooded and dark before removing his hand. He let out a frustrated sigh, taking a deep drink from his glass. His eyes were more troubled than usual, sending a wave of longing through me. I wanted to wipe the irritation and worry from his face, to run my fingers over his frowning lips. Those things would have to wait a moment. I told you I was looking for information about your brother. Alpha Madox cleared his throat, his eyes dark and troubled. I found what I was looking for. You know where he is? I immediately perked up, stepping towards Alpha Madox without noticing. I have a strong inkling where Sean may be. Alpha Madox sighed, as though he didn't want to have this conversation. I sent some of my men to various cities, searching for what information they could find. It seems the vampires have been gathering for much longer than we anticipated. Packs in the United States haven't thought of vampires in nearly 60 years, we had almost forgotten they existed. The vampires have spread out in many cities, taking control of what they could. Many own clubs, and even large corporations. Mainly businesses open at night, due to their aversion to the Sunday. I was practically shaking with anticipation, my heart a thundering mess in my chest. I willed him to continue, silently begging him to give me the information I needed. I would head into the city by myself if need be. I would bring my brother home at all costs. With each word Alpha Madox spoke, the chain around my heart grew tighter. Word is the vampires enjoy watching the brutality of others, placing bets with life or D*th. They have an underground fighting tournament, one that appears in different cities each time. I have word Sean is a participant, forced to fight others for sport. I also happen to know where this week's fight will be held. Atlanta, just a few hours from where we are now. Before Alpha Madox could finish, the words were flying from my mouth with little thought. I'm coming. When are we leaving? The words left my lips in a rush, my heart pounding with anticipation. Chapter 63. Alpha Madox insisted on keeping our group small, wanting us to blend in with the mix of human, werewolf, and vampires. I insisted on bringing along Mason and Brianna. The two of them could hold their own, and I trusted each with my life. I couldn't think of two werewolves better suited to help us out. While Alpha Madox preferred, I stay behind, he left the choice in my own hands. I'm sure he figured I'd sneak out regardless and find a way to accompany them. It was only vacant rumor whispered from ear to ear that depicted Sean as one of the many fighters participating tomorrow night, but it was a chance. It was the first we had heard of Sean's whereabouts, and I was willing to take the risk. I'm meeting up with the two of them tomorrow. I informed Alpha Madox, I'll make sure they're ready. I could see the worry in Alpha Madox's eyes as the two of us slid into bed. I could feel his worry as it mirrored my own. Would I be visiting my father again tonight? It was clear Alpha Madox was used to dealing with threats through brute strength and his claim as an alpha. He had never encountered an enemy he couldn't touch, and was powerless to stop my father from pulling me close again. I said nothing as he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into his large chest. While my stomach fluttered at the intimate position we were laying in, I gave into his warmth and the intoxicating swirl of his scent. I had slept peacefully last night, not a single dream lingering in my mind. When I finally peeled my eyes open and winced at harsh sunlight, Alpha Madox was already dressed and ready to leave. His eyes lingered on my porcelain skin, his eyes burning over every dip and curve of my body. I had long ago stopped trying to wear clothes in his bedroom. Alpha Madox was a man of his word, not once allowing me to sleep with any form of clothes on. Be here at 6 in the afternoon, no later. Alpha Madox grunted, peeling his dark eyes away from my body. I wouldn't tell your dad where we're going just yet, wouldn't want to get his hopes up. The minute I tell him we're leaving, he's going to know what's going on. I snorted, pulling on a pair of jeans and a dark blouse. Then don't tell him you're leaving. Alpha Madox's dark eyebrow lifted, his eyes roaming my face questioningly. My grandma will know, she always does. I shrugged, but I'll do what I can. I told Alpha Madox about the books Brianna had found in her mom's library, and how they might give more information on our situation. Alpha Madox almost seemed eager when I told him there could be information on removing the scarlet mark from my skin. The three of you can skip training. Alpha Madox grunted, his honey eyes flashing as they looked into my own. 10 minutes after texting Brianna, her car rolled into the large driveway. Mason was already seated in the back, his hazel eyes perking up as I walked from the house. You seem excited to read some old, musty books. I chuckled, flashing Mason a smirk. Mason rolled his eyes, brushing his sandy hair away from his face. More like he's excited to potentially get me KD. Brianna snorted, let's make this as quick as possible. The three of us headed back to Brianna's house, quiet as we opened the front door. I could feel Brianna's anxiety like a thick cloak wrapped around her. I was unaware her mom had a safe full of books, but judging from Brianna's aloof demeanor, her mom was quite serious about the books locked away. Instead of taking our usual place in the living room, the two of us followed Brianna down one of the hallways in her home. They locked the library. Brianna snorted, digging through the drawers in her parents' bedroom. A dull pain throbbed in my chest as my eyes roamed the framed photos sitting on her parents' dresser. Each photo held some part of their lives. One was a wedding photo, Brianna's mom and dad gazing lovingly at one another. The sight poked and scraped at the hole that had formed in my chest at my own mom's D*th. When I had first come back home, I was hell-bent on ignoring the pain. Even now, I felt incapable of dealing with the loss. With everything that's been going on, it had been easy to block out the dull ache. I had never been close with my mom, never had the relationship her and Sean had, but she still held a place in my heart. The two of us could never see eye to eye and would constantly argue. Learning about my vampire side gave me a better understanding of my mom. For whatever reason, her mate had been the vampire king. Her one-time slip-up resulted in me, a half-breed. Yet she had remained strong for so long, resisting the pull of her deadly mate. You have a library in your house? Mason snorted, as though he were surprised. You're really surprised? Brianna turned, seeking an eyebrow at a smirking Mason. I guess I shouldn't be. Mason chuckled, they locked the library. What if you wanted to go in? They know I hate stepping foot in their library. Brianna shook her head, a grin on her face as she pulled a small silver key from one of the drawers. History books make my brain go numb. I prefer the wonderful world of fiction. Brianna led us down the hall to a set of dark double doors. Her parents' library smelled of crisp leather, fresh air, and a whole lot of dust. Each and every book lining the ceiling-high shelves looked old and worn. I wasn't sure there was a new book in this entire library. While the bindings on some were holding strong, others looked as though they might burst at any moment. I half expected some of the books to disintegrate, spewing and scattering pages along the floor. Dark leather furniture sat in the middle of the room, in the center of the looming bookshelves. Mason and I plopped down on the dark leather sofa, my eyes trailing the library around us. I felt as though I were sitting in the center of a tornado, a swirl of books surrounding us. Brianna gave us each a tentative glance and headed over to the far wall. In between bookshelves, a large painting hung on the wall. I found myself wanting to laugh at Brianna's parents for their obvious hiding place. The painting was of an older man, no doubt a figure from our history. The frame was a thick and gilded gold, looking older than many of the books in this library. Brianna swung the painting to the side, much like you would a normal door. Nestled in the wall behind the painting was a thick silver safe. They need a safe like that just to hide some books. Mason coughed, glancing at the safe with a wary look on his face. My parents are paranoid. Brianna shrugged, they think the books would get stolen. While they happen to be paranoid, they like to write everything down. I found the code to the safe months ago. What if they changed it? Mason's light eyebrow lifted, his eyes still locked on the gleaming safe. Brianna turned her attention to the safe, entering in an 8-digit code. A moment of silence ensued, one that left me holding my breath. A loud click followed by a flashing green light came from the safe. They didn't. Brianna shrugged, giving Mason a cocky grin. Mom's horrible with remembering numbers. She used to forget Dad's birthday all the time. Mason and I waited with held breath as Brianna opened the thick safe. An exhale of breath came from Mason's lips as we locked eyes on the only book sitting in the safe. One book. Mason scoffed, shaking out his sandy blonde hair. An entire safe for one book. Like I said, my parents are paranoid. Brianna shrugged, her hands gentle as she lifted the book into her arms. Plus, this book is probably priceless. Brianna winced as the book hit the oak coffee table with a thud. The cover was thick and practically hanging on by a thread. It was clear her parents had done everything in their power to preserve this book. While it didn't have the dusty smell most of their other books had, this one looked decades older. The pages were thick and stained, the writing on them faded and patchy. I could feel the makings of a headache begin as my eyes roamed the pages, struggling to make out the carefully written words. A few moments of silence passed, 3 sets of eyes scanning the weathered pages. This is a journal of some kind. Mason frowned, his eyes running over the strange figures and symbols etched onto the paper. This looks like a first account of the burning. Brianna breathed, looking almost excited. I was sure her mom would nearly faint if she saw her daughter excited over history. Even our elders don't know the actual story. Mason breathed, looking just as absorbed as Brianna. They pass it down through the years, but it changes every time. Looks like your grandma was right, Lola. Brianna chuckled, her eyes still locked on the book. The burning happened because a vampire was mated to a werewolf. Mom and Dad always told me the vampires attacked first. Something flashed in Brianna's gaze, something that oddly resembled pity. That's my dad's version of the story too. I nodded, only Grandma told me about the vampire in love with a werewolf. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Brianna frowned, flipping the pages gently. She nibbled on her lower lip, her eyes clouded as she scanned the book. That two people in love couldn't have a happy ending, all because of their species. I wonder if the vampires were plotting against the pack back then. I frowned, my eyes scanning Brianna's face. It looks like they weren't. It looks like a case of wrong place, wrong time. The she-wolf had found her mate, only to realize it was a vampire. Brianna let out a shaky sigh, nudging the book closer to me. This is what we're looking for. My own eyes drifted down to the book, the strange look on Brianna's face forgotten for the moment. Even Mason looked uncomfortable, glancing at Brianna every couple seconds. I was able to make out the words mark, mate, and half-breed without much hassle. The first half of the page was identical to what Brianna's mom had showed me. It told vague information of the Curitis bloodline, and how controlling the shadows was a suspected ability. The bottom half of the page was completely different. Instead of blank space, words had taken up the lower half of the page. Half-breed vampires and humans have coupled since the beginning of time with little effects. With enhanced senses, speed, and strength, these creatures lack the ability to befuddle the mind. While vampires have an average lifespan, they are able to resist disease and illness. Vampires are able to mark their chosen mates, whether they be human or vampire. Mating between vampires and werewolves holds a complexity that eludes most. Both species is able to mark their mates, yet a werewolf is unable to choose its desired mate. A mark is a symbol placed onto the skin, signifying a connection between two parties. It is known, a vampire's mark works very similarly to a werewolf's. A connection is established between two parties, a bond formed as the mark heals on skin. A mark will heighten emotions and feelings of intimacy. Once complete, a mark will not fade from skin. The symbol is permanent, as is the bond between two souls. Completion of the mark involves both parties adorning the same symbol, followed by the process of physically mating. Though there have been rare occurrences, little is known about these particular half-breeds. Few werewolves and vampires have been mated, and even fewer couple to produce offspring. Vampires and werewolves have long been thought of as natural enemies. Acknowledging the ability for vampires and werewolves to mate poses a heavy question. Are the two species truly destined natural enemies? During the 1,500 SA surge of half-breeds appeared across Eastern Europe. Various tests had been done before each half-breed met an untimely DE. It is unknown whether werewolves or vampires are responsible for this mass slaughter. A she-wolf by the name Catherine had completed the mating process with a vampire. Pregnant and unmarked, a male in her pack had long desired Catherine. After taking her in the night, the fellow werewolf placed his mark upon her skin. Upon the arrival of her true mate, Catherine had searched for any possible way to remove the mark from her skin. Unable to find a way around the werewolf's mark, her vampire mate placed his own. The mark of the werewolf faded, replaced by that of her true mate. These half-breeds are similar to vampires and werewolves individually. Each half-breed adapts differently, taking on certain qualities of their species. Few half-breeds studied lacked a wolf spirit within them, unable to shift. These half-breeds craved blood over food. Those half-breeds with a wolf spirit living within them often craved food, unresponsive when introduced to blood. While these creatures vary, they each had heightened strength and speed, and were also able to detect the scent of vampires. Vampires claim the ability to mask their scent, to hide the sickly sweet scent that flows from their pores. Half-breeds are able to detect this scent, whether it be concealed or not. I tried to hide my interest at the last paragraph I had read. The thought of drinking blood sent a wave of disgust down my spine. I could only assume vampires weren't in the business of drinking animal blood. The thought nearly made me want to retch. Hunting in wolf form was different. Maya enjoyed hunting other animals, much as a wolf would. My eyes widened as I read the paragraph a second time, a distant thought crossing my mind. I had met someone who could smell the vampires. The two of us picked up on that sickly sweet scent, even as the other wolves were unable. Chapter 64. After reading our fill of the information before us, the three of us trudged back into the living room. Brianna made sure to return the book, placing it exactly how it was when she had removed it from the safe. Can't be too careful. Brianna chuckled breathlessly, but her eyes looked pained. The three of us sat in silence, each mulling over our own bit of information. I hadn't told them about Jessie, not having realized how important she was until now. I had met Jessie during patrol one night with Carter, Wade, and Mason. 2 years younger than me, but outrunning patrol due to her keen sense of smell. I wasn't sure if Jessie knew of her heritage, but happily placed it into the worry about later category. There was little point for me to jump into Jessie's life and turn it upside down. When the silence finally became too much, and I remembered Alpha Madox's plan for tonight, I broke the silence. How would you two feel about coming with me to get Sean back? My voice sounded stronger than I felt, my words coming out strong and steady. My insides were a knot of nerves. Worrying about Sean and his safety, along with my father's plans and the annoying mark on my neck. While I felt elated to have found information about my mark, I still had a week before my 19th birthday. An entire week to endure this mark on my skin, to deal with the constant pull I felt whenever I thought of Tristan. Does Alpha Madox know of this plan to save Sean? Brianna's eyebrow lifted, some of the trouble in her eyes faded at the distraction. Of course. I scoffed, he's the one who came up with the idea. It's like you have no faith in me. Faith? That's what you call it. Brianna chuckled, my question now grabbing her full attention. What would we have to do? Mason's eyes were locked on my own, a lopsided grin forming on his face. Alpha Madox is bringing 2 of his own men. We're going to a nightclub in some city. There they have this underground fighting tournament, one with werewolves and humans. My lips slowly fell as I said the words out loud. I'm sure we were all thinking the same thing. If Sean was there and we managed to rescue him, would he be the same? So, are we storming the gates? Or is this more of a lay-low operation? Mason quipped, breaking the air of unease that had filled the room. I think it's a lay-low operation. I chuckled, Alpha Madox will go more in depth once we leave tonight, but for now dress the part. I wonder how many werewolves they get have come into their clubs. Brianna mused, her fingers tapping against her jeans. Hopefully a couple. I mumbled, that's something you should mention to Alpha Madox tonight. Be at the pack house before 6. Claiming she had some errands to run, Brianna dropped Mason and I at my old house. Anytime I mentioned my grandma's cooking, Mason nearly jumped from his shoes in excitement. I was sure by the end of the year, Grandma would want to adopt both Brianna and Mason. I made sure to tell Mason to keep the plan from my dad. It would butcher my insides to see the look of sorrow on his face if we failed, or if Sean was nowhere to be found. Felt like I haven't seen ya in ages, kid. Dad grunted, watching from his usual place on the recliner. Some football rerun played quietly on the television. We saw her yesterday at the fight. Grandma pointed out, coming inside from the backyard, an exasperated look on her face as she eyed her middle-aged son. I meant around here. Dad grunted, she's hardly been around the house, been spending all her time up with Alpha Madox. Grandma shot me a quick look, followed by a wink that made my stomach twist into knots. She lives at the pack house now. Grandma snorted, pulling some food from the refrigerator, as if she had known the two of us walked into her house hungry. Mason, would you give me a hand with some of this? Mason scrambled like an eager kid to help my grandma, asking questions along the way. Your parents ever teach you to cook? Grandma side-eyed Mason, a smile playing on her lips. Not really. Mason shrugged, giving Grandma a sheepish grin. I worked at a deli last year, so I know how to fry up some meat, but that's the extent of my cooking abilities. Grab an apron and let me show you my ways. Grandma chuckled, tossing an apron at a shocked-looking Mason. I gave him a thumbs up and plopped down on the couch, shooting my dad a grin. How've you been leaking the pack house, Lola? Dad grunted, forcing his eyes to remain on the television. Something in his tone piqued my interest. He sounded uncomfortable and hesitate, holding back what he really wanted to ask. It's been fine. My eyebrow lifted as I took in my dad's weathered yet handsome features. And I suppose the alpha's been treatin' you all right. Dad grumbled, clearing his throat before reluctantly forcing his eyes on me. Dad, just ask your question. I chuckled, ignoring the ball of discomfort in my stomach. We're both horrible liars and you look like you're about to be sick. After giving me a defensive grimace, Dad finally caved. You and Alpha Madox seem close. Dad grunted, waiting for me to make the connection. I just don't want to see you in the same situation as before, you know. A violent blush filled my face, my dad's words and their multiple meanings swarmed my head. I'm not. There's nothing for you to worry about. I chuckled, my birthday's almost here, which will solve a lot of my problems. I hadn't told my dad the possibility of my mate being a vampire, nor could I bring myself to mention it. Neither of us had talked about what Tristan did, or what Mom had done. I couldn't bring myself to mention the past, to reopen the wound she had caused all those years ago. A sour taste filled my mouth at the thought of my mom. I had been so quick to shove the pain away, that I never had a chance to truly mourn her. Even now, there were far too many other things drawing my attention. Well, you're not outright lying. Maya snorted, we are pretty close with Alpha Madox. Hush! I hissed, Dad doesn't need to know that. And the raging blush on your face is supposed to reassure him. Maya chuckled. I trust you, Lola. Dad nodded, his eyes running over the deep blush that stained my cheeks. Got any plans for your birthday? I'll probably just run around town like a crazy person, sniffing around for my mate. I shrugged, the usual. From the kitchen I could hear my grandma snort, a cheeky smile on her face as she met my eyes. Mason had a smear of flour across his chin. The white powder stood out on his tan skin, looking much like chalk dust. You'll do no such thing. Grandma chuckled, shaking her head. I'm sure Alpha Madox would be more than willing to throw you a birthday party. I'm not sure I'm up to a birthday party this year. I chuckled lowly, remembering how well Chelsea's birthday at Hayes had gone. Well, we did meet Brittany that night, but our time with Alpha Madox was well worth it. Maya shrugged, making an excellent point. With all of the bad stuff going on, everyone needs something to celebrate. Grandma shrugged, her eyes lit with her mysterious and seemingly infinite wisdom. I'll think about it, but I doubt Alpha Madox would want to throw me a birthday party. I shrugged, peeling my eyes away from Grandma's knowing gaze. The four of us had dinner in the kitchen. Every so often Grandma would flash a proud smile at Mason, who returned the action feverishly. Once dinner was finished, Dad retreated out to the fire pit, a beer nestled in his hand. Grandma wasted little time, practically cornering me in the small living room. Does Alpha Madox have any news on Sean? Grandma frowned, her light-colored eyes searching my own. While I could have tried to hide the information from Grandma, she would know something was up. Whether she found out the truth or not, it would bug her until we came home safely. We might have information on where Sean is. We're going tonight to try and bring him home. I murmured, hoping the TV would out the sound of my voice. Be safe, Lola. I know you can handle yourself. Grandma nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Something flickered in the back of her eyes, something that was clearly eating away at her. Is there anything you need to tell me? I lifted my eyebrow at her, my eyes searching the lines on her face. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Grandma shook her head. Focus on getting Sean back, we can talk after. I'll hold you to that. I nodded, letting out a weary sigh as Grandma pulled me into her arms. Dad dropped Mason off at home before taking me to the pack house. If we were trying to go in the club undetected, we'd have to look the part. While I trusted Brianna to do most of my makeup, I wasn't completely incapable. I dug through one of the closets in Alpha Madox's bedroom. He had all of my clothes moved into his room, and had my stomach twisting at the thought hours after. I slipped on a tight black dress. It reached around mid-th, but covered all of my bits nicely. The neckline dipped down my chest, showing the barest hint of cleavage. Perfect to wear to a club, but also give me some sense of security. I curled my hair lightly, letting it fall down my back in thick waves of obsidian. I slipped on a pair of medium-length heels, long enough to poke an eye out if need be. Once I finally came downstairs, Alpha Madox and Alpha Zeke were in the middle of a heated conversation. Alpha Madox's eyes found my own, as though he had felt me enter the room. I watched with concealed satisfaction as his honey eyes grew dark, taking in every ounce of creamy skin I had left open to view. I'll stay here and babysit Alpha Bran, but next time you're taking me along. Alpha Zeke grunted, crossing his arms over his chest. A wicked grin formed on his face at Alpha Madox's clear reaction to me. The sight sent a jolt of pleasure down my spine, one that had me hoping Alpha Madox was in fact my mate. Brianna and Mason arrived on time, 10 minutes before 6. They each had dressed for the occasion. Dark in color, Brianna's dress resembled my own. I ignored the blatant desirable stare Alpha Zeke had given Brianna, and it seems she too ignored his powerful gaze. Mason wore dark slacks followed by a long-sleeve top. The shirt clung to the dips and ridges in his body, making his muscles stand out. Alpha Madox had put every one of us to shame, his outfit simple yet highlighting every delicious ounce of his body. His black shirt was thin, consisting of a material that clung to every ripple of his muscles. His build looked huge in the outfit he wore, concealing most of his skin yet highlighting every bump and groove. His large forearms were visible, the sleeves of his shirt bunched up at the elbows. Carter and Wade were last to stroll into the room, the hint of a friendly smile forming on Carter's face. Wade remained stoic as he often did, eyeing the four of us somewhat warily. I want to make this as fast as possible. Alpha Madox grunted to the five of us. Alpha Zeke's friend can get two of us into the fight, the rest will linger in the club. Keep an open mind, Link, at all times, I want no surprises tonight. While my stomach turned, we all listened intently. The prospect of finding my brother weighed heavily in my stomach, and for a moment, I had wished I skipped dinner. Chapter 65. We went over the plan a couple more times in the car. The silent whoosh from the highway lulled me, almost making me tired. While my eyes grew heavy, my nerves were shot. There was too much riding on our success tonight, especially on such short notice. Alpha Madox sat behind the wheel of the dark SUV we were driving. I sat in the far back wedged between Brianna and Mason. Carter and Wade sat in the middle seats, separated by a thick console. We're all going in separately. Lola stick by my side, Brianna and Mason stay together, Carter and Wade watch each other's backs. Alpha Madox grunted from the front seat. Won't they know who you are? Brianna frowned, giving Alpha Madox a wary glance. I locked eyes with Alpha Madox through the rear-view mirror, a strange sense of determination filling his honey eyes. I knew Alpha Madox was here for my benefit. Typically, he would send a group of his men and stay behind. Alpha Madox was taking a risk leaving his pack, a risk that hadn't gone unnoticed. Beta Devon and Alpha Zeke stayed behind to monitor the pack, to ensure no one noticed Alpha Madox's absence. I'm sure Beta Devon and Alpha Zeke also stayed behind to keep a close eye on Alpha Bran, who had spent the past day pouting over his loss. I'll cover my scent. Most of them haven't seen my face. That'll have to be enough. Alpha Madox frowned, his light eyes locked on my own. Lola and I will head to the back where the fight takes place. Brianna and Mason stay in the club, keep a close eye on everything. Carter and Wade, circle the building then head back to the front. Make sure the car's ready. What city did you say we were going to? Mason frowned, shifting uncomfortably in the back seat. I didn't say. Alpha Madox sighed, running a hand through his dark tousled hair. We're going to Atlanta. Mason's body went rigid, growing uncomfortably still in the seat beside me. His discomfort was written on his face, his eyes filling with a foreign emotion. Are you all right? I murmured lowly, a gentle hand tugging on Mason's sleeve. Yeah. Mason cleared his throat, his face looking unseasonably pale. I used to live in Atlanta, before we moved back. I wanted to press Mason, to ask what happened to him in Atlanta but halted. His full lips were twisted into a frown, an expression Mason rarely wore. Brianna and Mason had the same strange light flickering in their eyes, a sort of wary hopefulness they couldn't shed. Not wanting to ask in a car full of people, I made the silent decision to ask them later, if this entire night went according to plan. Are you up for this? I grimaced, my heart racing in my chest. As selfish as it sounded, I needed to know before we walked into vampire territory. Any hesitation, any reluctance could cost me Sean. At this point, it wasn't about me and how I felt. This wasn't about my conflicting heritage or my strange connection to Tristan. This was about getting Sean home safely, making sure I didn't lose another family member. I'll be all right, I promise. Mason grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. I have a lot of memories of Atlanta, not all good experiences. You can always talk to me, you know. I frowned, a pang of guilt rolling about in my stomach. I had been so concerned with my own life, that I hadn't asked about my two closest friends. I hadn't a clue how Brianna and her mate were faring, especially after hearing how her mate wasn't accepting of who we were. I had a mate once. Mason frowned, his eyes burning into the palms of his hands. His hazel eyes were sad as they met my own, a sense of sorrow I had never experienced lingered in their depths. I met her in Atlanta. What happened? I breathed, unable to control myself. I knew Mason was over 19, but he had never mentioned a mate before. I figured he would tell me when he felt the need, not wanting to push before I truly got to know the guy. She tricked me, led me to a park in the middle of the night. The guys with her left me for DD. Mason murmured, his eyes that were usually filled with happiness and excitement looked dull and faded. Everyone in the SUV was silent, clearly trying not to listen in on what Mason was telling me. Mason didn't seem to care, if he even noticed. How I opened my mouth to speak, to ask how mere human men could have nearly killed a werewolf. As if he anticipated my question, Mason continued his story. I thought she might have had a boyfriend, and the guy got pissed at me, but it was so much worse. Mason frowned, shaking his head slowly. I wasn't sure until I saw the mark on your shoulder, the one the vampire left on you. My own lips turned down in a frown, wondering what my mark had to do with Mason's mate. Something inside my heart tugged at the mention of Tristan, but I shoved the irritating emotion to the side. She was mated to a vampire. Mason's voice held strong, but was intertwined with such sadness. They both had identical marks on their shoulder, just like yours. I stopped, because truly what could I say? Losing your mate was more than just a simple breakup. The loss of your mate signified the loss of part of your soul. Happiness could still be found, but the person would live a half-life, one where they constantly wondered what if. It posed a question in my mind, one I had been trying to avoid. If Tristan were my mate, what would I do? Would I have the strength to resist the mate bond? If I were able to reject him, what would be my next move? I couldn't go back to Alpha Madox and pretend nothing had changed. If Tristan was truly my mate, that meant Alpha Madox had a mate out in the world. I would never be able to forgive myself if I took Alpha Madox away from his destined mate. Time will tell. Maya murmured, no use in tormenting yourself over it, there's nothing you can do until your birthday. Thanks for the words of wisdom. I muttered, letting out a nervous sigh. It's all right. Mason sighed, the fog clearing from his eyes. It's hard, but some days aren't so bad. Sometimes something good can come from a bad situation. Mason shot me one of his lopsided smiles, a strange emotion surging through my chest. His hazel eyes flickered with some hidden emotion, one that prompted Mason to drape his arm over the back of the seat. What was she like? I couldn't help but ask, my own curiosity winning over. Absolutely stunning. Mason chuckled, everything I could have ever wanted, and yet she was nothing like I'd expected. From the corner of my eye, I could see Brianna listening intently to our conversation. A glimmer of pain flashed in her gaze, subdued before I could analyze any further. While my heart went out to Mason, I hoped Brianna's ending would be much different. As our conversation faded, the dull hum of the highway grew louder. The monotonous sound tugged on my eyelids, my body beckoning me into the darkness. There was little anticipation coming from the six of us. The drive was silent, a heavy sense of foreboding and acceptance emanating from each of us. I wondered if everyone else had the same knot in their stomachs, their nerves feeling bristled and frayed. The silence in the SUV gave me plenty of time to think about everything that could go wrong. We were essentially walking into a trap, one we might not emerge from. Looking pretty sleepy there, Lola. Alpha Madox's voice caressed my skin, raising little goosebumps along my arms. I lifted my head from the seat, my eyes darting to Alpha Madox warily. His eyes were on the road, his large hands grasping the steering wheel tightly. His full lips were slightly parted, tempting me from where I sat. Maybe you should take a nap. Alpha Madox chuckled through the mind link, making me jump at the sudden noise. I'm not sure I'm able to. I sighed, the true extent of my nerves shining through in my voice. I'm scared. What if we lose Sean? How will I be able to face my dad? He already lost Mom, I can't let him lose Sean. I'd be worried if you weren't scared. Alpha Madox's voice was a calm murmur, a safe beacon in the middle of a violent ocean. I swam towards his voice and the security it provided. You can't think that way. Don't think about what could go wrong, just focus on what we came here to do. Alpha Madox, calm in the face of danger. I chuckled through the mind link, butterflies swarming my stomach as Alpha Madox shot me a look through the rearview mirror. His dark eyebrow was cocked, the hint of a smirk playing at his lips. Alpha Madox continued talking to me through the mind link, chasing away all lingering thoughts of our reckless plan tonight. Chapter 66. My eyes snapped open, my body jolting upright as we hit a bump in the road. I must have dozed off, as the road signs said Atlanta was a mere 10 miles away. My nap had been dreamless, floating in the blissful darkness without a lingering thought. The knots in my stomach came back full force as I remembered what we were doing tonight. Alpha Madox had talked to me in private, telling me the role I'd be forced to play. I'd pose as Alpha Madox's girlfriend, a title I wasn't completely opposed to. It was clear there was something going on between the two of us, and I hadn't seen Alpha Madox with another she-wolf. The thought made me smug, and yet I continued wondering what we were to each other. Thinking about Alpha Madox was an enjoyable distraction from our mission tonight. While Wade had an alluring calmness to him, Carter was practically bursting at the seams. If anyone was excited for what tonight had in store, it was Carter. For the first half of the drive, Carter was jumping with excitement at the thought of KGA vampire. Carter had been trained in Alpha Madox's pack his entire life, never old enough for actual battle. This was the first time Carter was leaving the pack, going on his first mission. Alpha Madox stifled Carter's exited rant with a growl, allowing the silence to continue. While Carter and Wade seemed attached at the hip, Wade had battled against rogues countless times. The full impacts of our mission dawned on me as we hopped on the exit for Atlanta, GA. There was so much that could go wrong, that could leave Sean injured or worse. We had little time to plan, forced to strike before they moved Sean to another location. My biggest fear was someone at the club recognizing Alpha Madox or I. I couldn't see Tristan visiting a club to watch men fight to the D*th, but better to be prepared. In between the silence, I practiced what my grandma had told me. I rebuilt the crumbled bookshelves in my mind, placing my thoughts between each page. An hour later and a dull headache, the library in my mind was organized. It had been left in shambles the last time I faced Tristan. A cold chill ran across my skin at the thought of facing him again. We veered off the exit into Atlanta, GA, and was instantly met with the sprawling city. Skyscrapers sat, shining windows and bright lights. Tourists and residents were bunched in pairs, walking down the sidewalk without a care in the world. I watched as Mason's eyes glazed over, no doubt living through every memory he had here. We drove through the center of the crowded city. The sun had long ago set, drawing out the vast nightlife of Atlanta. Neon signs hung at the ends of corners pointing at various clubs and bars. The smell of freshly cooked food and alcohol was being carried on the breeze. We continued driving, past the crowds of scantily dressed women, past the vibrant clubs with their pulsing music. Soon the crowds began to thin, the number of people outside dwindling significantly. Alpha Madox pulled into a poorly lit parking lot, the tires of the SUV crunching loudly as it drove over the loose gravel. Confusion was written clear on my face, my eyes glued to the dark and grim building in front of us. It looked to be an old warehouse, some of the windows blocked and boarded. The outside of the warehouse was covered in sprawling vines inching their way up to the sky. Just as I readied to open my mouth and insist, "We came to the wrong place," I noticed the number of cars occupying the parking lot. We parked towards the front, as close to the doors as we could manage. New cars of varying colors and models were scattered around the parking lot. Each car looked shiny and new, some newer than others. What better place than an abandoned warehouse, Carter scoffed, cracking his neck and flexing his fingers. Remember, keep constant tabs on each other. Alpha Madox's voice was rough and stern, his honey eyes locked on the five of us. If Lola and I need to flee, I expect the four of you to know about it. The mind link will be open the entire time. No worries, Alpha. If Wade and I get stuck, leave us behind. We'll fight our way out. Carter smirked, his shoulders bouncing as he fake jabbed a couple times. Wade gave his friend a tired look, his eyebrow raised as he silently questioned Carter's sanity. Do you actually hear the things you say? Brianna quipped, not skipping a beat as she glared at Carter. Or do you just talk out and hope it goes well? I couldn't help but snicker at her comment along with the glare on her face. Carter placed a hand over his heart, giving Brianna an insulted look. From the looks of it, Brianna's comment earned a chuckle from all of us, a nice distraction to lighten the soul-crushing mood. So mean. Carter shook his head, giving Wade a weary glance. The six of us headed to the front door, not a person in sight. Anticipation and worry filled my gut. Would we manage to get Sean home safely? Will Sean even be the same person after what happened to him? We won't leave here without Sean. Brianna murmured from beside me, linking her arm in my own. We'll bring him home, Lola. I hope so. I breathed, unable to say much else. I adjusted my tight dress and smoothed down my long hair. The neckline was low, enhancing my cleavage yet managed to cover the scarlet mark on my shoulder. A long shiver rolled through me, and for a moment I regretted not bringing a jacket. It wasn't the air that chilled me, it was the thought of what could go wrong. Put this around your neck. Alpha Madox murmured, handing me a red lanyard. His cologne wafted into my nose, soothing some of the turmoil in my stomach. Is this our way in? I frowned, wondering why Brianna and Mason weren't wearing one. This is how we get into the fight. Alpha Madox continued, slipping the lanyard over my head. It'll be in another part of the warehouse, I'm sure. Keep an eye on the exits, we don't want to get blocked in. We're going to have to cause a scene to get Sean out of here, aren't we? I grimaced, my fists clenched at my side. There was no way we'd be able to sneak Sean from the building, not when he was supposed to be fighting. This wasn't a mission of stealth, but of cunning. We would have to find some way to get Sean free while saving our own skin. We are. Alpha Madox nodded, rolling his lower lip between his teeth. Do you have a plan for that? I paused, my eyes scanning his rugged face. No, I don't. Alpha Madox shook his head, there wasn't enough time. You don't have a plan. My lips were pressed tightly together, unwelcome surprise flowing through me. Much to my dismay, Alpha Madox's lips turned up in a smirk. His honey-colored eyes shined with amusement, despite the weight of the situation. I figured we could take a page from your book. Alpha Madox chuckled lowly, act first, think later. Improvise. You want to improvise with my brother's life on the line. I sighed, for once seeing the error of my own ways. Not so fun when it's someone else acting before thinking, is it? Maya's smug voice rang out in my head. Now is not the time for a life lesson, Maya. I snapped, turning my attention back to Alpha Madox. There's always time for a good life lesson. Maya shrugged, backing off once she sensed my irritation. Like I said, there wasn't enough time. Alpha Madox frowned, his voice a rough murmur. If we waited, there would be no telling when Sean would pop up again. He could be halfway across the country if we wait. I knew Alpha Madox was right, but that did nothing to calm my ragged nerves. Maya sent small increments of strength into my veins, enough to calm my hammering heart. Silence swept over the entire parking lot, and I held my breath as Alpha Madox knocked on the large swinging doors. A second passed by, followed by another until one of the wide glass doors opened. The windows were blacked out, hiding whatever lay beyond the doors. A bald man opened the door, his body built like a mountain. Even his head was rounded, uneven in its shape. The guy looked as though he were carved from the side of a mountain, rippling muscles larger than my head lined his arms. The guy was standing just inside the warehouse, in a little black room clad of any furniture or decoration. The only light hung from the ceiling, casting its yellow hue against the blacked-out walls. Alpha Madox approached the man leisurely, with the calmness even I couldn't muster. The man made no moves, even as Alpha Madox leaned in and murmured something to the man. With little more than a grunt, the bouncer walked us over to another set of doors, on the opposite side of the blacked-out room. The moment he opened the doors, thundering music and blissful laughter could be heard. The flashing lights swarmed around the room and seemed to be landing on a new person each time. The smell of alcohol lingered in the air, coupled with the blindingly sweet scent of vampires. Chapter 67. The six of us wandered inside the club, the floor practically vibrating from the bass of the music. Red and white lights flashed in the air, dazzling me each time they crossed my vision. The entire club was coated in harsh red light, even the scattered furniture was red velvet. The inside of the club was actually fairly appealing. From the inside, you'd never be able to tell this place was an old warehouse. The inside looked completely remodeled, fresh black paint coating the walls and shiny oak boards covered the floor. Towards the back of the room sat a long platform. Tables, chairs, and booths sat on the platform with only a few people occupying them. A thick red rope lined the platform, cutting off the back half of the club. A silver placard with the word VIP etched in hung from the rope. Each side of the club had a long bar, 3 bartenders on each side rushing to fill orders. In the center of the club sat a rounded bar, 2 younger guys in the middle made bright-looking drinks. Even with the severity of what we planned to do, the club had a nice feel to it. Everyone was either dancing the night away or ordering some of the colorful drinks. If it wasn't for the sickly sweet scent of vampires, I might actually enjoy this club. Talk through mind link. Alpha Madox murmured to the 5 of us, I won't risk anyone overhearing. Where do you want us, Alpha? Carter asked through the mind link, his eyes scanning the room. I want the 2 of you to split up, but keep close to the doors. Alpha Madox led me over to one of the bars, his face an impassive mask as he ordered a drink. He managed to order a drink and talk to the bartender while talking to the 5 of us through the mind link. Brianna and Mason, split up and head deeper into the club. Lola and I will head to the VIP area. Keep your eyes and ears open. Alpha Madox brought the cup of liquor to his lips, his eyes calmly scanning the room. I wasn't sure what Alpha Madox was looking for. It was nearly impossible to pinpoint anything. The flashing lights and the crowd of people dancing made it nearly impossible to focus our senses. While I could smell the scent of vampires throughout the club, the scent was scattered and difficult to pinpoint. Either there were a lot of vampires here, or there's one vampire who happens to move very fast. Unfortunately, I was betting the latter. Carter and Wade were the first 2 to break off, each strolling to a different side of the club. Brianna followed Alpha Madox and I to the bar, while Mason headed to the other side of the club. Got a good view of the VIP area from over here. Mason told the 5 of us through mind link. We won't be any help once you get in the back. You'll be close enough to come if we call. Alpha Madox's voice was harder than usual. Keep an eye on those doors and blend in. Are you ready? Alpha Madox spoke directly to me, his honey-colored eyes meeting my gaze. It was hard not to ogle with Alpha Madox standing this close to me, but I managed. There will be plenty of time for that once we get Sean. Maya murmured appreciatively. Let's do this. I breathed, my worried eyes burning into Alpha Madox's. I could feel his own calmness washing through the mind link. Alpha Madox was confident in what we were planning to do tonight. His own willpower rivaled my own, and I wondered how far he would go to get my brother back. From the small glimpse he had given me into his mind, he was willing to go pretty far. Alpha Madox held his arm out waiting for me to step forward. My torso rested against his own, his arm draped over my shoulders. I took deep breaths of his intoxicating scent, desperate to drive the smell of vampires from my nose. While his cologne and woodsy scent were all I could smell, the sickly sweet scent lingered. I melted against Alpha Madox's body as though I had been made for him. His fingers traced patterns on my shoulders, sending goosebumps scatter along my skin. Alpha Madox led the way, maneuvering the two of us through scattered groups of people. Some danced as we walked through, wandering fingers grazing against my lower back. Although his eyes burned with anger, Alpha Madox made no move against the guys with wandering hands. A small group of girls stopped Alpha Madox and I, their intense gaze telling me all I need to know. Each were scantily dressed, wearing clothes that hardly covered their backsides. Despite their attempt at flirting with Alpha Madox, the group of girls actually looked good. Even with jealousy rushing through me, I wasn't the type to bully anyone for what they wear. We made it to the back of the club, standing near the corner of the velvet rope. The back of the club was a little less crowded, the clothes much nicer and more expensive. The VIP area was filled with wealthy-looking people. Two guys at a table wore suits, as though they had just gotten off work. Standing at one of the back doors, a huge man stood keeping eye on everyone. The guy looked nearly identical to the one at the front door. Both built bigger than linebackers, a lumpy head and tree trunks for arms. The man took one look at our lanyards and grunted, unclipping the velvet rope to let us forward. While it was difficult to make out his scent, I was fairly sure the man was human. Some part of me wondered what his parents looked like. What kind of people could create a human that big? Focus on the task. Maya mumbled, giving me an irritated huff. What's a dog like you doing here? The large man grimaced, his voice as menacing as his body. I'm here to bet. Alpha Madox smirked, staring up at the man with an amused expression. While my heart thundered in my chest, the large man seemed unfazed. Do you get a lot of us dogs? Get plenty of 'em. Mostly rogues. The guy grunted, his face a misshapen unyielding mask. Most of 'em aren't dressed as nice. Never seen you before. Have you been here long, human? Alpha Madox said the word human as though it were an insult. The smirk on his chiseled face remained intact, but his eyes flashed dangerously. I had to give the guy some credit, he definitely had BS. Not a single member of our pack would stare Alpha Madox down. It was considered a disrespectful action, not that it ever stopped me. I was sure the big guy noticed the murderous glint in Alpha Madox's eyes. He knew what we were, and I was sure he knew his employers were vampires. He must be used to dealing with us short-tempered creatures. The bouncer averted his eyes, sensing the power that rolled from Alpha Madox in dark waves. Without another word, the bouncer stepped aside and led us into another room. I had never been inside a warehouse before, but always imagined it as this brightly lit sprawling place, people flitting about as they worked machinery. The back of the warehouse had been completely remodeled, and I wondered how long it had taken them to fix everything up. Dark walls, hardwood flooring and brightly lit chandeliers. Large velvet couches lined the room, almost as if it were a movie theater. Young men in tuxedos walked the room, platters of champagne and glasses of a deep red liquid that was hopefully wine. The back half of the warehouse was sectioned off by a temporary back wall. Through a thick sheet of glass, a fighting ring stood in the center of the room. Each seat was positioned to watch the fighting ring. My heart thundered in my chest, wondering if I would see my brother through the thick glass. I had been right, there was no chance we would escape without a fight. Alpha Madox entered the room without hesitation, as though he had been there countless times before. His actions held a certain calmness I found myself jealous of. I ran my fingers over the length of my dress, trying to still the trembling of my hands. The sickly sweet smell was much stronger back here. A few people sat on other identical couches, their eyes scanning the room. Some turned to look at Alpha Madox and I. I could feel the stares across my skin, and somehow knew they were vampires. I couldn't discern any specific scent, but some hidden instinct within me knew. "Relax, you look like you're going to be sick," Alpha Madox murmured through the mind link. I was extremely aware of the 4 other presences in my mind and knew Brianna and the guys would hear our silent conversation. "I do not," I grumbled, resisting the urge to grimace at Alpha Madox. "Get a drink, relax. Once they see the look on your face, the vampires will see right through you." Irritation rolled through me, but I forced my face to remain a calm mask. A deep chuckle rang out in my mind as Alpha Madox felt my irritation. I let excitement shine through as I raked my eyes over the fighting ring. Alpha Madox led the 2 of us to one of the velvet couches. Without warning, Alpha Madox sat on the couch, his hands on my hips as he pulled me down. I landed on his lap, forcing a smile on my face as he nipped at my jaw. Don't get me wrong, I was enjoying every bit of this, but I was aware we had an audience. As if to prove my point, one of the middle-aged vampires in the room glanced my way. "Good girl," Alpha Madox murmured, giving my waist a playful squeeze. I could feel Carter and Wade in my mind, both trying to ignore what they heard. Blood rushed to my face, catching a few more vampire eyes at the sight. "They probably want to eat us," Maya grumbled. "Can they?" I frowned, I am half vampire. "I have no idea, but I wouldn't put it past them." Maya shrugged, content on ignoring that other side of me. Alpha Madox handed me a glass of champagne. I drank the fruity drink greedily, wishing it were something stronger. As a few more people came into the back room, a man approached Alpha Madox and I. I knew he was a vampire the moment our eyes met. His raven hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, his eyes a startling shade of green. A black suit clung to every curve and dip of his body. My heart hammered in my chest as he took a seat beside Alpha Madox and I. I placed a mask of calm over my face, hoping it wouldn't crack. My fear was rightfully placed, and I could only hope my training with Chris had been sufficient. "Hello Alpha Madox Desmond." The vampire shot the 2 of us a knowing smile, a nerve-wracking shine to his emerald eyes. Chapter 68. If Alpha Madox was surprised by the vampire's words, he didn't let it show. Alpha Madox's face remained an impassive mask, disinterest flashing in his eyes. I wondered how he managed to keep his cool, and how long it had taken him to perfect that technique. Alpha Madox raked his eyes over the vampire lazily, a neutral expression on his face. I honed my features, hoping they would convey the same disinterest. While my heart was a hammering mess, I meticulously checked the stable bookshelves in my mind. Each thought and memory were safely tucked away, bound in leather and stuffed onto a shelf. Before I could wonder if the man was a full-blooded vampire, I felt someone entering my mind. Clear as day, I watched as the raven-haired vampire strolled through my mind. His nails scratched against the thick oak bookshelves. It felt like an irritating scratching sensation in the back of my mind, an itch I could never scratch. It took all of my concentration to keep the library in my mind upright. Clearly this guy wasn't as skilled as Tristan with the mind games. Nonetheless, his intrusion caused me discomfort. I wasn't sure I had room in my head for anyone else. Maya already took up enough space. Resisting the urge to wince, I schooled my face into an irritated glare. Could you stay out of my head? I raised my eyebrow at the vampire, my eyes flashing dangerously. It itches. Alpha Madox turned his eyes to me, letting them flash with caution and concern before wiping the emotions away. The raven-haired vampire stared at me blankly before letting his lips turn up in a dazzling smile. While the smile transformed the man's entire face, it was a smile that lacked any form of warmth or comfort. His smile was serpent-like, cold, and calculating. My apologies, but surely you can't blame me for trying. The raven-haired man smirked, his emerald eyes bright and alert. Instead of insulting me, let's keep the vampires out of our head. Maya grumbled, bristling at the close proximity between the vampire and I. It is a welcome surprise to find you here, Alpha Madox. The vampire smirked, his emerald eyes raking over Alpha Madox before turning on me. His full lips turned up in interest as he met my eyes. Something dark twinkled in their depths, a knowing smile forming on the man's face. And a pleasure to finally meet you, Lola. I presume you're here for one of our fighters. A low warning growl shook Alpha Madox's chest, the vampire's smile deepening in response. The bright-eyed vampire knew why we were here, who we had come for. This could be a trap. Maya murmured, they don't plan on letting us leave. I knew we'd have to fight our way out of here the moment we stepped inside. Let's make it count and take Sean with us. I nodded in response. Alpha Madox's voice filtered through my mind, anger lacing his tone. I could feel the presences of Brianna and the guys listening in, waiting for word of what happened. They knew we were coming. Alpha Madox repeated what Maya had said, his voice hard yet determined. We're waiting for an opening. I'll need a distraction to get the three of us out safely. When I give the signal, sow chaos. Annoying pinpricks danced behind my eyes as I looked at Alpha Madox. He was determined to lead this mission even though he had no obligation to my family. He could have just sent a team of men to do the job for him, but he knew I'd insist on coming along. He was willing to go so far to get my brother, willing to fight for his life. I felt the same as I thought about Brianna and Mason, how there was no hesitation when I asked for their help. I gathered up my strength and forced the tears away, giving the vampire a hard look. If you know what we're here for, then you know how far I am willing to go to get him back. My voice came out steady and strong, conveying none of the that currently boiled in my stomach. There was no reason to continue playing nice. I wasn't needlessly trying to start a fight, but it was better to get straight to the point. Whether they had time to prepare or not, they knew what we came for. I refused to let myself think of Tristan, determined to ignore the fluttering in my stomach at the thought of seeing him. Since the scarlet mark on my shoulder had healed, I felt the pull to Tristan much stronger than before. That small part of me hoped Tristan would be here tonight. Maya growled in frustration, hating the scarlet mark that brought nothing but torment. A fight would be pointless, unnecessary bloodshed. The dark-haired vampire shrugged, his emerald eyes flashing with amusement. He leaned forward, his cold eyes staring into my own. I'm sure we can come to an agreement. Alpha Madox caught on without needing an explanation, but I could feel the growl that had been building in his chest. Attacking the vampire would do us no good, at least not at the moment. The fight had yet to begin and Sean was nowhere in sight. "What do you want for him?" My voice was hard and cold, but even I couldn't hide the interest that lingered in my gaze. As though he knew I were hooked, a serpentine smile formed on his face. "That can be discussed." The vampire smiled, the strange expression lighting up his face. "Do you even have him?" Alpha Madox's voice matched my own, cold and patient. "Stay for the fight, Alpha Madox. You'll see soon enough." The vampire's eyes hardened as they flickered to Alpha Madox. "My friend will be over to discuss our terms." In a fluid and graceful movement, the vampire stood and left the two of us alone. Alpha Madox's eyes met my own, and I swore we were thinking the same thing. "An agreement?" Brianna frowned, her voice concerned as she spoke through the mind link. "Sounds kind of sketchy." Carter's voice ran through my mind, followed by Mason and Wade's approval. "There will be no agreement." Alpha Madox's voice was hard, leaving no room for negotiation. "We will bide our time, and wait until they bring out Sean. Once I call for a distraction, we'll grab Sean and fight our way out. We may have to leave out the side door. If we do, we'll circle around front and meet you there." I chimed in, earning a glance of approval from Alpha Madox. Ignoring how close the two of us were seated and the heat that crept along my skin, I turned my eyes to the fighting ring. It seemed the fights were about to begin, all wandering eyes turning to the spectacle in the center of the room. Two men were pushed forward, each looking pissed and disheveled. Hatred and acceptance burned in their eyes, protesting yet to their fate. There was little hesitation before the two men leaped at one another. While one was built large, the other had rippling muscles. They leaped at one another, the muscular guy taking the bigger one to the ground. Interested chatter broke out among the people watching. Burning disgust had risen in my throat, directed towards the vampire's enjoyment at the fight. "Hello, beautiful!" A voice called out, that small bit of my soul reaching out to touch. Tristan strolled over to the couch Alpha Madox and I sat on. His blonde hair was light like snow, his eyes the lightest shade of blue. He was nicely dressed, wearing black slacks and a black button-down shirt. The top buttons on his shirt were undone, giving a glimpse of his hard chest. I was equally attracted and disgusted, my own emotions a boiling mess in my head. Alpha Madox stiffened beside me, feeling my inner turmoil through the mind link. Tristan's eyes danced as he looked me over only to harden as they met Alpha Madox's eyes. With little care for the fight going on before us, Tristan took a seat beside the two of us. I was keenly aware Tristan had chosen to sit next to me, as close as he could get without hassle. Some small part of me cooed, "He won't hurt me." "Are you all right?" Alpha Madox sent over the mind link, unable to hide the hostility and concern in his tone. "Keep him out of your head. It's your mind, kick him out if he tries. I can handle this." I reassured him, collecting my scattered thoughts. I focused on Maya, latching onto that side of myself with all of my strength. Instead of picturing my library, I tried a different approach. A set of iron doors sat in the front of my mind, impenetrable and unmovable. Layers upon layers of iron and steel blocking what lay within. Tristan's seafoam eyes met my own, a smile playing on his lips. A dull prickling sensation formed at the base of my skull, irritating and incessant. I swore I could feel his fingers grazing against the door in my mind, stroking it lightly as he willed it to cave in. After giving myself a headache, I felt Tristan leave my mind. I had held the door firmly, but not without consequence. As though I had run a marathon, my head was throbbing and my limbs weak. Rather than letting my exhaustion show, I leaned closer into Alpha Madox, propping some of my weight against him. Tristan watched the action, his light eyes flaring at the sight. Maya grumbled smugly, practically screaming her hatred for Tristan. I didn't have to look to know Alpha Madox had a smug expression on his face, aimed directly at Tristan. After an irritated snarl, Tristan turned his intense gaze to me. His blue eyes burned into my own, calling out to the small shard of me that longed for him. I turned my head away from his own, determined to chase away the trail of heat his eyes left along my skin. I wanted to cringe as I watched the brutality of the fight. The muscular guy had blood falling from his chin, spitting it across the floor as he fought for his life. The bigger man held more strength, clearly a werewolf from the looks of it. A silver bracelet seared into his wrist, silencing his wolf and keeping him from shifting. Silver against the flesh will bend and nullify your wolf, but will not take away your strength or speed. Silver in the bloodstream will destroy us from within, almost a certain unless treated right away. A sour look formed on my face as I watched the human and werewolf fight. I found it unfair how the werewolf still had his strength and speed, using it to brutalize the human. The human had speed on his side, much like myself. His speed was what kept him alive so far. "Are you not enjoying the fight, beautiful?" Tristan asked, his face impassive while his eyes burned. A werewolf against a human. I scoffed, ignoring my thundering traitorous heart. He's clearly stronger and faster, it's not a fair fight. It isn't, is it? Tristan mused, a playful smile playing at the edges of lips. I have quite a bit of money placed on this fight. Let's even the odds, shall we? Tristan waved his hand and the vampire we had spoken to earlier came to his side. The vampire with raven hair and emerald eyes smiled at me, a smile that bore too much intimacy and familiarity for my comfort. Without a word, Tristan pulled a wad of bills from his pocket and placed it in the man's hand. "Let's see if a human is smarter than a wolf." Tristan smiled, his eyes gazing down to where his mark sat covered. I kept my eyes on the fight, resisting the urge to steal a glance at Tristan. I had almost missed it when a small shard of silver was thrown into the fighting ring. Large enough to pierce a beating heart if need be. Time seemed to slow, the seconds ticking by as my heart rate skyrocketed. The two men locked eyes, a wave of understanding between the two. Both scrambled for the dagger, for a clean way out of the fight. The human was faster, diving to the floor with the dagger in hand. The werewolf's moves were rushed now, more frantic than they were before. The human had the upper hand, using the werewolf's impulsive blows against him. In just a second, it was all over. The human had rolled to the ground, dodging the werewolf's lunge. The silver blade met flesh, sinking into the werewolf's chest with a sickening thud. I swore I could hear his last heartbeats, swore I could see the light leave his eyes as he clattered to the floor. I felt sick to my stomach, ready to dispel the champagne I had drank tonight. My skin felt sticky, slick with nervous sweat. How anyone could find this entertaining was beyond me. Betting on life and DH made my insides feel rotten, but renewed my strength and purpose. "Who did you bet on?" I found myself asking. I almost flinched with surprise, noting how calm my voice had sounded. "The human." Tristan smirked, his eyes flickering with amusement. Chapter 69. I want to see Sean first. I frowned, my eyes flickering to the mess in the fighting ring. Of course. Tristan's velvety voice caressed my skin, but did nothing to erase the disgust burning in my stomach. The fighting ring was cleaned quickly, not a trace of blood lingered on the white floor. Some people in the small crowd grimaced or mumbled angrily over the loss of their money. It was unnerving how these people could watch such brutality. My heart leaped in my stomach as 2 more men were pushed onto the stage. Sean's face came into view, looking haggard yet defiant. One of his eyes had been blackened and looked to be slowly healing. His lip was split, a thick line of blood running down the center. From the angry glint in his eye, Sean had not been broken by these vampires. "What's your price?" I spoke without thinking, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My heart thundered in my chest at the sight of Sean. His skin was pale from lack of sunlight, the hair on his head unruly. "What do you want for him?" "What I want is you." Tristan breathed, his voice calm and his eyes steady on me. My eyes snapped over to Tristan, reading the sincerity in his eyes. Tristan wouldn't budge, that much was clear. "Name something else." Alpha Madox snapped, anger seeping into his eyes. "A life for a life." "Lola for Sean." Tristan murmured, his eyes burning into my own. He hadn't spared an ounce of his attention, placing it all on me. "Is your brother worth your own life? How far would you truly go?" Alpha Madox stiffened, his anger rolling in waves through the mind link. I could feel Brianna and Mason tense as they heard our conversation through the mind link. Tristan's words replayed in my head, bouncing between the 6 of us. "Don't you dare, Lola!" Alpha Madox snarled through the mind link, sensing my hesitation. I wanted to deny I had even contemplated it, but I couldn't. I hadn't the time to properly mourn my mom's death, but I refused to mourn Sean's. I refused to let him suffer because of what I am. Alpha Madox could sense how far I was truly willing to go. "Brianna, we could use that distraction now." Alpha Madox growled through the mind link. I stifled the surprise that crossed onto my face, wondering what Alpha Madox had planned. "All right, give me a minute." Brianna huffed, leaping into action. "Stall him or something." "Why do you want me?" I stared at Tristan, my gaze hard and unyielding. "Is it because of my father?" If Tristan was surprised, it didn't show. His lips simply turned up in a mischievous grin, his seafoam eyes dancing. "I thought someone was listening in on us." Tristan chuckled, before leaning in. "Messing with the shadows already? I hope you're a fast learner." "I didn't bring myself there." I scoffed, shaking my head. "For whatever reason your king wanted me to be there." Tristan's eyes conveyed nothing, not even the smallest trace of lingering emotion. "Vampires choose their own mates. From the moment I met you, I knew you were mine. This was before I learned of your heritage." Tristan murmured, his voice a silky whisper. "You had felt it then as well." "I looked into your mind, saw your desire for me." Tristan had successfully taken my mind off of the fight, gaining all of my attention. Guilt swarmed me as I had forgotten about my brother in those short moments. Sean and the human had lunged at one another. Steady fists and heightened speed gave my brother the advantage against the average-sized human. "You were just some hot guy in a club," I muttered, my eyes filling with anger. "Your words lie, but your thoughts do not." Tristan murmured, and I fought against his intense gaze. "I know what you feel for me. I feel the pull as well." Deny, deny, deny. Tristan would never know the full extent of my longing for him, the irritating pull in my veins whenever I thought of his face. I would hide that from the world, accepting the discomfort and pain before I told anyone the truth. Alpha Madox chased those emotions away, dulled the part of me that longed for Tristan. A silver dagger clattered onto the fighting ring. My wide eyes met Tristan's, a sly smile had already formed on his face. Even the odds? Tristan questioned, his voice light and caressing. Sean and the human scrambled for the knife. I found myself leaning forward, anticipation and fear suffocating me. Just as Sean's hand wrapped around the hilt of the dagger, an explosion sounded. All at once everything went to hell. Fire alarms blared in unity, sprinklers spewed water onto everything below. Those watching stood in surprise, hair slick as the water rained down. "Get Sean and get out!" Brianna hissed, her words clipped. Alpha Madox pulled the two of us to our feet, lunging at Tristan without hesitation. Tristan had been much faster than I thought, on his feet as Alpha Madox made contact. "Get Sean!" Alpha Madox snapped, knocking me from my daze. "Carter and Wade, get your asses in here. On our way." Carter's voice was laced with excitement. "Wait till you see what Brianna did." If it weren't for the fight ahead, I would have laughed at the comment. I ran towards the back of the room, heading to the door that led backstage. The room had erupted into chaos, thick black smoke seeping in through the doors. The smell of burning wood filled the room, and I wondered what Brianna had decided to do. As I threw open the backstage door, someone heavy knocked me to the floor. Sean's scent filled my nose, along with the tang of fresh blood. His eyes were wide but burned with determination. The silver cuff still sat on his wrist, silencing his wolf and searing his skin. The silver knife was clutched in his hand, a grip around its hilt. The doors slammed open, swinging shut with a deafening slam. The smell of burning wood and plastic was stronger, as was the smoke lingering in the air. Carter and Wade barreled into the room, their eyes set on the vampires who crouched menacingly. Some of the crowd had left, filtering out of the club at the first sign of danger. Others stayed behind, their eyes shining with anger as they looked between Alpha Madox and I. Sean pulled the two of us from the floor, his arms holding me in a grip that lasted for just a moment. Chaos ensued as two vampires headed for Sean and I, only to be stopped by Carter and Wade. Tristan had gotten away from Alpha Madox, barking out an order. Alpha Madox was on his feet, a whirlwind of snarls and blows. Tristan was skilled, almost matching Alpha Madox in his own blows. My heart thundered, my eyes torn between who to help. Carter and Wade were beginning to shift, their nails lengthening as they cut down vampires. The ones who fell were quickly replaced, soon overwhelming Carter and Wade. I knew they could handle their own, but their opponents had every ounce of their attention. A vampire lunged at Sean, who darted to the side with the silver blade slick in his hand. "Leave Lola untouched," Tristan murmured, his pale eyes once again burning into my own. Alpha Madox was fending off three vampires, ones who had quickly arrived after Tristan's order. A vampire lunged at me, a older man with graying hair and dark eyes. Instead of tearing into my skin, his large hands wrapped around my own. Anger and strength surged through me, expelling through every blow I made. My knee slammed into his gut, knocking him back and ripping his hands from my body. Tristan had left the room while I was distracted, a dozen vampires to take his place. All at once I took in the severity of the situation, my heart a-thudding rapidly in my chest. Alpha Madox was overwhelmed, sweat gleaming on his forehead, and a look of fury in his eyes. 4 vampires surrounded him, 4 surrounded Carter and Wade. Sean was fighting 2 at a time, his eyes bright and alert. Another 2 were making their way over to me, the same cold glint in their eyes. A cold sweat broke out over my skin, more thick smoke poured into the back of the warehouse and the water continued raining down. The harsh air burned the back of my lungs, the scent nearly overwhelming. "You're running out of time," Brianna's voice hissed in my mind, a faint afterthought as I looked around the room. Fear scattered along my skin, My eyes locked on Alpha Madox. The vampires had brought him to his knees. There littered the ground at Alpha Madox's feet, countless vampires had died at his hands. Everything seemed to slow, that familiar icy caress sliding over my skin. Lola, don't! Maya's voice was cut short as I called out to the shadows. I slapped across my skin, Maya's words fading from my mind. I had promised myself I wouldn't use the shadows again, but there was no way we were winning this fight. They had known we were coming, had prepared for it all along. They had the numbers, overwhelming us easily. If I didn't act fast, Alpha Madox would lose his life, followed by Carter and Wade. Desperation rushed through me. For once, I didn't have to wonder how far I would go. Save him! I hissed, feeling the icy tendrils lap at my skin. Save Alpha Madox and get rid of these vampires. The price is steep, the disembodied voice slithered into my mind, a life for a life. Its voice circled my mind, stirring my thoughts violently. I knew what it was asking, what it wanted from me. What scared me the most was how easy the decision was. My life for Alpha Madox's, a worthy trade. Every intimate moment between Alpha Madox and I flashed through my mind, igniting a comfortable flutter in my stomach. My feelings for Alpha Madox had changed since I had met him, a fact I had been trying to ignore. As I realized the lengths I would go to for Alpha Madox, it wasn't a hard decision to make. I don't care. I breathed, I accept. A cunning icy breeze caressed my mind, as though they were thanking me. One by one each of the vampires stiffened, their glassy eyes rolling in the backs of their heads. Each fell to the ground, a loud thud against the wooden floor. Somehow, I knew they were still alive, simply incapacitated for the time being. I could see the shadows flit from vampire to vampire, each collapsing to the floor in its wake. I locked eyes with Alpha Madox, for once his emotions were written plain on his face. I could taste his fury and feel his concern. He could see the gathering darkness behind me, and could only assume what I had given it in return. My own eyes widened as the icy voice slithered into my mind, its words sending me to my knees. You would give your life, princess? They hissed, slithering around in my head. You do not get to choose. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.